Hello and welcome to Rights and Recourse, a program that tackles legal issues, bringing you information and analysis. My name is Dumil Matez. Remember, you can also be part of our discussion today by tweeting us at Rights Recourse or calling our studio line on 011 714 5497 or 5498. Alternatively, email your thoughts to rightsandrecourse at sabc.co.za. South Africa's labour relations came under the spotlight this week at the International Labour Conference held in Cape Town. An array of labour law experts from different countries gathered to scrutinise labour issues that are in line with the pillars of the International Labour Organization's decent work agenda, using South Africa as a case study. The Congress is viewed by many as a platform to debate the ongoing labour challenges across the globe. But before we get into our discussion, let us take a look at this insert by Vanessa Puna.
A roundtable debate attended by labour and business experts, including the drafters of South Africa's Labour Relations Act of 1995. It's been lauded as one of the most progressive pieces of legislation in the world. Yet, 20 years on, the country appears to be at the tipping point of labour relations. A widening gap between rich and poor and a disconnect between labour and business are cited as some of the problem areas.
One of the issues that was underestimated when we began this enterprise in 1995 was just the extraordinary effect of inequality in South Africa, which is a legacy from apartheid. And unless that's redressed, you can shout till the cows come home. Unless we address that in part, a significant part, then indeed we may not well have the dialogue, and then everything else flows deleteriously therefrom.
Some of the panelists say there's a lack of trust between business and labour, giving rise to protracted and often violent strike action.
The business sector has undermined the Labour Relations Act at every turn. The labour brokers is a classic example of how the law is undermined and workers' rights and the protection under the LRA is taken away. And that's causing the conflict, that's causing the law not to work, and that's causing the kind of violence and dissatisfaction that we're seeing in strikes.
One of the key players in drafting the Act says there's room for improvement.
One of the issues, when you look at what happened at Marikana and in London, I would see now that maybe one should have got and given the CCMA the power to admit unions and give them organisational rights, even if they don't make the full threshold. I certainly would recommend an amendment that would, that if we had that type of situation again, you could conciliate and finally arbitrate and ensure the organisational rights for a trade union that has a significant number.
Dennis Davis says there's been an overestimation of the effect the legislation has in bringing about social change in South Africa. Vanessa Puna for Rights and Recourse in Cape Town.
Well, thank you very much there to Vanessa. To unpack today's topic, we would like to welcome Mr Bongani Mbali, who is the Commissioner from the CCMA for Dispute Management and Prevention. We're also joined by Mr Vic Van Vuuren, who is the Director of the International Labour Organization. And lastly, we are joined by Professor Stefan Van Eck from the Faculty of Law from the University of Pretoria. Gentlemen, welcome, and to the Rights and Recourse. Thank you for joining us. The question I want to ask, Stefan, if you could give us a sort of the broad themes of the conference that are covered at the conference.
Thank you. Well, it was an absolute wonderful opportunity where we had specialists from all over the world, including Professor Supio from France, Professor Manfred Weiss from Germany, Professor Simon Deacon from Cambridge, and also with South African specialists like Professor Darcy de Tooy, Professor Nicholas Schmidt, and the like, who discussed some of the main themes being to what extent labour law still remains relevant in these troubling times, and whether there is a need for an evolution of the scope of the traditional role of labour law, which could possibly assist with aspects such as growth in the number of jobs, to have a more equal society, not only in South Africa, but across the world.
But Vic, from your point of view, what I want to know is, what are the challenges facing labour law in the 21st century?
I think, first of all, there's different laws, or the law will have to be applied differently to the different parts of the world. We're a developing economy, and often we're equated to the developed economies. And the challenge is that we don't have social protection mechanisms like those developed economies. And therefore, we must understand there's going to be a different application of it. So in the South African instance, I think we've got good labour laws. It's the application of the laws that's letting us down, where the union and the employers are not getting down and resolving the way and how to deal with these issues. We've got a huge social deficit. And the role of social dialogue, which I hope we can talk about, needs to be enhanced far beyond what we're dealing with at the moment.
Let's go to something else that was raised by Tony Ararach in the insert, Bongani, and he says there's a disconnect between labour and industry, and you deal with these things almost every day.
Yeah, thank you. Well, maybe to tackle the issue, one is to understand that labour and unions, and employers, at all material terms, they come from different angles. They have different interests that they are protecting. And now what that means is that we're living in a society, like my colleagues have said, that there are issues around one, like your social security, whereby if workers at this point in time, given the job crisis, are retrenched, so to speak, some by virtue of where they work and their vulnerability, they go out of work without much to start their lives going forward. And I think is specifically speaking to that disconnect, that we need to find parties coming together and finding alternatives that are either safe jobs, or if people are eventually retrenched, but they can be able to survive going forward. It's a challenging issue.
We normally hear, Professor Stefan Van Eck, that people talk about a social contract. And you guys have raised this issue of the social security issues. Can we go straight there? What are the social security issues we're talking about?
Well, if you don't mind, let me just take us a little bit back in history. We had, in the period just before South Africa entered its new democratic phase, a wonderful era of social dialogue when political parties across the board said that we need to get to a situation where it is not one of us and them. It's an issue of everybody has got to take and to give. And at that stage, just in the region of 1994, we experienced a situation where NEDLAC was established, and the social parties were able, in a very short time, able to establish the current Labour Relations Act, which, with the assistance of ILO experts, they were able to establish a world-class piece of legislation. But from there, we have developed now to a situation where we are quite adversarial. And there was a huge eroding of the levels of trust between business and organized labor. And that, I would think, would be our major challenge at this stage. But not only at these higher levels of NEDLAC and in Parliament, but moving it right down to the workplace, where employers and workers need to develop a situation of building trust, which we don't seem to have in South Africa, unfortunately.
There's that word again, adversarial. The question is, does the labor relations between unions and the industry have to be, the employers and the employees have to be adversarial?
Not really. I mean, maybe one needs to mention one thing quickly. CCMA have changed its strategy. We've got strategy called Centro Mehluko. Our focus now are on dispute management and prevention. Basically what that means, it means that CCMA need to go to the labor market and engage the parties around social dialogue to achieve social justice. But in so doing, we also develop the capacity and the leadership of the users, because this issue of trust, to some extent, is caused by a number of things. Information not being shared on time, people coming up with a short goal, so to speak, without looking broadly in terms of where they are going, in terms of the relationship going forward. So one needs to understand that these issues are not as they are articulated at this point in time.
Can I come in there?
No, you can come in.
The value of the human being needs to come back on the table. If you look worldwide, we've got over 250 million unemployed people. We've got a huge amount of people earning less than $1 a day. So the human suffering out there is huge. We cannot negate the fact that there are business principles where businesses need to make a profit. But at the same time, we need to bring in that human beings are not a commodity that can come and go as people please. We're dealing with the lives of people and their families. And so what we need now is not to narrow our process of collective bargaining around wages and service conditions. And that's what we've done. The whole debate is narrowed down to a few weeks in the year where we have this intense battle around the shop floor, which inevitably results in strikes and issues.
What is normally called the negotiation period.
Yes, the negotiation period, and then the battle lines are drawn. What we need is a far more in-depth and longer social dialogue between the employer and employee. Government as employer as well need to come to the party. That engagement should deal with the issues that are confronting workers. Then we might start finding our way through this very difficult period. So it's not only the law that's important, but how we apply the law.
Quickly, if you can make a point.
If I can come into this, as part of the discussions we had at the World Congress, was also the question of the scope of labor law. Should we not also extend our discussions to those who are engaged in work, but who are not in employer-employee relationship, such as the people who make curios, the people who also are involved in informal business? And aren't we looking at all of this in a too narrow fashion, because we are looking at people in a much broader context?
Well, you see there that Professor Stefan Van Eck is also saying housewives should be looked at. We should look at that too. If you'd like to join us in today's discussion, you can actually phone us on 011 714 5497 or 5498, or tweet us at Recourse. And you can send us what you think we should be discussing on rights and recourse at sabc.co.za. Stay with us.
SABC brings to you Rugby World Cup 2015.
Africa's tech scene is constantly coming up with innovative ways to answer some of the continent's problems.
We source content from social media, from our mobile apps, from our website.
And as people move from phone calls to data, companies have to switch what they offer.
People expect to get higher speeds, better quality broadband for less.
On Network, we have information on Africa's technology and social media scene. That's Network with Ms. Phumelele Zondi every Sunday at 9 p.m. Central African Time, only on SABC News.
Welcome back. We are unpacking what was discussed at the World Labour Congress in Cape Town last week. Let me come back to something else. Vic, probably you can help us. What are the three pillars of the International Labour Organization that you guys are talking about? We spoke about it in the introduction.
Well, we're looking at we're looking at laws, the whole standards, the setting of international standards. We're looking at social dialogue, which deals with process. We're looking at employment creation, but decent employment. And when we talk about decent employment, is that the workers are not abused. And looking
that's based on a decent employment.
Decent employment, so that it looks at safety at work, the health of the worker, the fact that they get maternity leave. Those are the examples of that. But then you have your social protection angle, where we're looking at a minimum floor of rights. That comes to retirement benefits. It looks at health. It looks at housing. It looks at grants. It looks at all of those things that look after a worker during their employment, but also there needs to be a safety net that catches workers when they are out of employment. And what we have is a situation in South Africa which is far better than most countries, where you've got child grants, where you've got old age grants, but there's a gap where people don't have any grants. And that's the affordability question, and whether we can create more jobs to pick them up, or whether the state can provide those mechanisms of free health, free education, and the like.
That gap is normally seen when a person needs to build a house, and then we are then told, I earn too much to get an RDP house, I earn too little to get a loan from the bank, and then you are in between. How can we get over that? Probably let's take the mines, for instance. Shouldn't they provide housing for their employees?
Well, that is one of the major problems that we've experienced with our migrant labor is a number of people have got a home far away from the mine, and then they work in harsh conditions where a second house is established, but a number of those miners actually support a family at home, and some of the miners are also developing a second family at the mine place. So that establishes quite difficult social problems for mining companies and for the workers working there to resolve.
Shouldn't the CCMA probably delve deeper into these kind of things so that we can avoid this kind of, because it is also something that workers need security, they need to have a roof over their heads?
Yeah, well, you must remember CCMA has a specific purpose because it's a creature of the statute. Ours is to manage disputes at the workplace and provide guidance. Through social dialogue and pushing the issue of social justice, we do bring about those issues. But in so doing, we provide advice, guidance, and expect the leadership of the parties to take it up. One may quickly mention that at the moment, given the job crisis that we have, CCMA is involved in the steel sector and in the mining sector, so to speak. And in those areas, we are working with government, trying to bring about parties together because we understand the impact that it will have in those families that is referring to, especially to some of those employees do not have some of these benefits that we are referring to. But shortly, coming short to your question, we are not in a position to prescribe. Our role is basically to bring about a conversation, bring about resolution to challenges that people have. So the Act doesn't give us that power that says this is what should be happening, except when the rights are violated.
If I can possibly come in here, it is a failure of our current system where collective bargaining, in my view, is on a too limited scope. And also the role players are also too limited. There are much broader issues. If one can just refer back to Marikana, it also relates to aspects such as the local authorities who are not coming to the challenge.
Coming to the party.
Coming to the party.
Because there was a story around Marikana that the mines have been paying money to the municipalities, but the houses were never built.
So it is a much broader problem, and I think that trade unions should not be limiting the discussion to aspects of wages only to that, but it is a much broader issue. If one also just has a look at the issue of the loan sharks that were prevalent there, the question can be posed, was the employer closely enough attuned to some of those problems? Shouldn't the employer have been more aware of, amongst other, the micro-loaning problems that they had, and also the breakdown in trust between those rock drillers and the trade union? They didn't want the trade union to represent them anymore. Right at
I think Professor Van Eck has hit the head on the nail, the nail on the head, or the nail on the head. I'm right. The question I wanted to know is collective bargaining under threat? Taking that example by Professor Van Eck.
I don't think collective bargaining is under threat. It's the nature of that collective bargaining that has changed. And what we do have now is a very adversarial approach. In not all industries, we must accept that there's some industries that are very successful in dealing with collective bargaining. But the ones that stand out are the ones, obviously, that are not working very well. And so collective bargaining has certainly here to stay, but I agree that we need to broaden that into a broader social dialogue. But we must understand that the employer cannot foot the bill when there's an inadequacy of housing and health, but they need to remain profitable. What we need is a macro debate, as we spoke about, a socio-economic debate where we look at what are the compromises that can be reached between business, government and labor at the macro level. And that needs to cascade down into the different sectors. Then we start making progress.
Do you want to come in there, or should I go to the next question?
No, you can. Mine is not that much different. Is to confirm that we don't believe that collective bargaining is under threat at all.
The other question I want to pose here is there is a view that aside from constitutional protection, the trade unions, they have a disproportionate political and economic influence because of their protected status within the tripartite alliance, and this has led to issues of productivity being sidelined.
Well, if I maybe can just latch on to what one of the previous speakers mentioned and the question of whether collective bargaining is under threat or not. I think the right to engage in collective bargaining is constitutionally protected. We've got a wonderful Labour Relations Act which explains and makes it possible to engage in collective bargaining. But there are a number of issues which is currently placing our collective bargaining under threat. And one of those we have already referred to is this total breakdown in trust, which leads us to a situation where a number of trade union members feel if we don't throw a little bit of violence into the pot of the collective bargaining, well, there is hardly any chance of us succeeding because the business just wants to make the profits. But also added to this, which I deem to be a threatening factor to our collective bargaining, is the fragmentation of trade unions. Because the trade unions used to have a relative coherent set. They spoke from one mouth, and now we see that quite a bit of trade union rivalry is happening because we all know about some of the problems in COSATU, which is losing the coherence that it had. Rival trade unions who are starting to get their foot into the door. And if there is not a strong central voice from the trade union side, it makes collective bargaining quite difficult.
How difficult does it make it? I know, Vic, you wanted to say something. Probably I should allow you to say something.
Well, when talks about politics and unions being joined in South Africa, we've got the strong alliances. One needs to understand that we've come through the era of apartheid in South Africa. That hasn't been normalized. Our society is not normal. And so it's not abnormal for trade unions to delve into the realms of politics, because that's where they're going to try and achieve, through the political voice and their negotiations, to try and normalize and get equality in our society. And as long as we've got that social gap and that inequality, that alliance will continue to be there. Only once we've gone beyond that will you see the situation going into perhaps a lesser active political worker group than we've got now. But yes, we've got this fragmentation of trade unions that Stefan has referred to. That is a huge challenge at the moment. And that's what we've got to work through. And that's why I come back to the social pact where we need to set these guidelines.
Well, if you want to join us in today's discussion, you can call us on 011 714 5497 or 5498 or tweet us at Rights Recourse. You can also email us, give us which topics we can discuss here on this show. We'll be back after the break.
Catch! Point! Set!
Get behind Rugby World Cup 2015 on SABC.
Welcome back, and we have a very active Twitter community. Let's see what this committee has to say about this issue. Here, Dipepa Mutuludi says we are facing junior employees disciplined for safety violations and senior employees protected from that. Atengosi, only way is control, control, control. How can we deal with violent strikes? This is better life, it says employers neglect workers' interests, only focus on profit, hence the violent protests. I think that's what it means there. Let's go back to this thing, gentlemen. There's a question that's being raised. I think you have raised it, and that question has to do with, I think Vic has raised it. The question has to do with profits. Why should we concentrate on profits rather than, first, the well-being of our people? And we make our people understand our business, make our people understand we come from here, we're getting there, this is how we're going to get there.
Vic? Well, I think, first of all, we need to understand that profits are going to be a role in our society, in the economy. Without profits, we don't have investors, we don't have a return on investment, and so profits are there. But
then we are not in business.
We're not in business. But at the same time, one's got to deal with what is a viable or a normal profit, acceptable level of profit. And that's what the unions are often asking. Are we too greedy in assessing the profit margins that we're putting into business? And that's where each industry will have to assess where they find themselves in the economic reality of a very difficult global market. Once they've defined those parameters, then one bargains within those parameters. And that's when one's got to find what the best deals are. But I do believe that we're at a crossroads where management has to also come to the party to indicate what they bring into the table. We have the highest Gini coefficient in the world, where the lowest salaries and the highest salaries are wider than any other country in the world. And how do we rectify that? The raise of the executives in certain industries from 2007 to 2012 has been exorbitant in comparison to Brazil and India and the countries that we're competing with. So we've got to take a serious look at how we're approaching this.
But surely, we normally make, this point is normally made that in China and India, people are productive, they develop these things. But then the trade unions then point out, no, there's no democratic processes in those countries.
Well, yes, just touching on to some of the aspects that Vic has also mentioned, we do have the opportunity for workplace democracy in South Africa. An issue that was discussed at the Congress was to look into the viability of workplace forums, which is an institution which the Labour Relations Act makes a provision for, where discussions can be conducted at the workplace, not just about the distribution of the profits. Those negotiations take place at central level. But to talk about productivity issues, how should the factory be adapted to make working conditions better, but also to make it profitable? But unfortunately, in our environment, the trade unions are not in support of workplace forums, because we only know one way of doing business, and that is almost like at the rugby scene. We've got to scrum.
We've got to scrum and knock each other's heads.
To bump our heads. And there's nothing about co-determination and putting our thoughts together how to make it a more productive workplace. So I think there is a lot of thought that needs to go into how we go ahead in building trust, not from the top to the bottom, but from the bottom up at all levels.
Bongani, you wanted to come in there?
Yeah, I wanted to raise, see, the issue of workplace forum, as I said, it must be taken by unions. And you find challenges that unions are not bringing it up. But what CCMA has done, which is beginning to show some results in some small way, we've got a program that is called Building Workplace Relations, which is intended to bring about the parties to start talking, like Vic was saying, from the beginning of the day, to say, where is this company going? What is the vision? What are the interests? And then they engage on a continuous basis. But unfortunately, you must get consent. We can't impose it to what you call it, to the users. So those users that have triggered it, that is, they have requested us to bring about it, they have seen some results. And you even see the manner in which disputes and conflict is in that workplace, because people are at a certain level, they know where the company is going. Of course, the relationship is already in conflict, but you minimize conflict, which I think is what workplace forums were intended to do.
Gentlemen, approximately 50 years ago, a gentleman who was in Port Elizabeth wrote a book called Sizobanzi is Dead. read this drama, Sizwe is Dead, about this workplace where the boss was coming from America and the workers got new overalls and the place was squeaky clean, was cleaned. It looks like nothing's changed from Sizwe is Dead.
Well, I think if one looks at the whole concept of productivity that you raised, it comes back to the word that we've continually used, of trust. The workers in South Africa often experience or believe that if you work harder, faster, smarter, you need less people. And therefore, I'm putting myself at risk if I have to increase productivity. If they can feel or understand that they will benefit in the productivity increases, then maybe we can get our productivity levels up. One of the successes of the future of our economy is going to be to increase our productivity far beyond the levels that we've got now. And therefore, we need to get down to some serious business of negotiating deals on productivity enhancements. The trade-off has got to be that the worker must get some benefit out of that.
If I can Prof, quickly before you answer, if you can put this answer that question together with this one. The question is, what about these huge salaries of the mine bosses, for instance, that are being publicized? And one mine boss said, "I'm not going to apologize for what I'm getting."
Yes, I must say it's extremely difficult for.
How does that contribute to this adversarial relationship?
I think the whole issue of the wage gap should really be placed on the table, and it goes beyond also only on those people who do have jobs. We should just not forget the huge segment of the country who are not in any form of formal employment. So there has been important initiatives that occurred after Marikana, where President Zuma has placed the emphasis on the fact that we cannot continue in this adversarial method. And it was called upon NEDLAC. Deputy President Cyril Ramaphosa was tasked to see to what extent we can revive the spirit of 1994 in give and take. We had the Ekurhuleni Accord, which was signed, and at this accord, the main issues that were placed on the table was namely, how are we going to, through social dialogue, be able to curb the unprocedural, protracted and violent strikes, but on the same hand to add the minimum wage on the table. And there it will really be an issue of the parties coming to the table and saying, we need a new social and labor accord because we cannot continue as this country is going now. Because if you look at the international investors, it is not about only how strict is your unfair dismissal laws. It is about how conducive is the collective labor setup within which you can do business. If you can't do business because the trade unions and employers are at loggerheads to such an extent, well, no investor will be willing to come and invest in such a country.
Professor Van Eck actually mentioned it. The question I want to know, Vic, is does NEDLAC work?
NEDLAC does work, but I think its effectiveness has waned over the years, and the interest of the parties. I mean, in the years gone by, you would have to clamber for a seat to participate in an executive management meeting. Nowadays, you've got to beg people to go to such a meeting. So I think the interest has waned, and I think that the Deputy President, in the Ekurhuleni statement that was made recently, has made a concerted effort to refocus on NEDLAC. So NEDLAC is here to stay. It has an important role to play. The players themselves need to take the lead in using the vehicle that is there. Because NEDLAC is seen as one of the best models in the world, but we don't seem to get over the last few years, have got it right to using it. If one looks at the way forward, I think that those who have need to take the lead rather than those who don't have. And I think if you've got, and that's where you spoke about the captains of industry, who have got these huge salaries, and justifiably sometimes they say in terms of international markets. But those who have need to come to the party to say, how can we help those who don't have get back onto the scale? And that's the challenge going forward.
We'll come back to that, Professor. Let me just go to a break. If you'd like to join us, you can still call us on 011-714-5497 or 5498, or tweet us at Rise Recourse. You can email your thoughts to rightsonrecourse@sabc.co.za. We'll be back after the break.
SABC brings to you Rugby World Cup 2015.
Let's do this.
Your World makes it its business every evening to round up the leading local stories and international news to keep you informed all the time.
Make a date with Your World every evening for all the news headlines around the world to keep you abreast with knowledge.
Catch Your World for headlines across the world every Monday to Friday from 9 p.m, then Saturday and Sunday from 7 p.m.
Welcome back to Rights and Recourse. Let's once again hear what the Twitter community has to say on this issue. Guru Beki Mavundla says, what is causing a decline in union membership across the world? It's a question I asked during the break. I think we must answer that question. And then Clement Masinya says from Mohele Reng, if the officer refused to explain his absence from work for 4 days in writing, what should be done? Anthony Lepule says transparency and transformation in education, courts and schools. And those are the, we're going to concentrate, that's the first question there that we need to answer. There's a question there that says, probably Vic, you can answer that question more succinctly. That is, what causes the decline of union membership worldwide?
Well, I think, first of all, a huge amount of unemployment that is increased because of the numbers have just gone off the scale in terms of the unemployment in most of the developing economies. In South Africa, we've got 26%. But coupled to that is the fact that union members are losing faith in their leadership in taking up workers' issues. And at the last COSATU Congress, there was this call back to basics about the leaders in the unions going back and looking at workers' rights and workers' issues. And I think that is most probably the biggest telling factor in that you were right when we said unions are playing in the political arena, but sometimes it is at the expense of workers' rights at the shop floor level. And so we're finding that that has also been a factor that has contributed towards a wane in union membership.
The other thing I wanted to find out, we spoke earlier about the unions do not want the workplace forums to be implemented. To what extent, over the years in South Africa, we have seen the formation of investment houses by unions. To what extent have unions concentrated on those investment houses that they form and forgot to put their eye on the ball?
Well, yes, it is a real concern that trade unions receive quite a bit of their income, not only from their trade union membership, but through other financial schemes. And that it relates exactly to the point which Vic made, to say that trade unions should really go back to basics and keep themselves busy with the interests of their employees, rather than becoming business-making machines on their own. And that may very well be one of the reasons why they are losing some of their trade union membership. And associated to this, the questions sometimes come in, but isn't it the strict labor laws of South Africa which is causing the unemployment? And wonderful research which is currently being conducted on this is to try and establish exactly what is the link between stricter labor laws and job growth across the world. And at Cambridge University, Professor Simon Deacon has actually challenged some of the work that has been done by the World Bank and the OECD, which indicates stricter labor laws, less jobs. And that does not seem to be the case, because there are very many other factors, such as it could possibly be tax regime of a particular country. It could be the conduciveness for peaceful collective bargaining at the industry, productivity in a country. But I must say, I agree with the point that the issue of how difficult it may be to dismiss an employee at the workplace, that on its own does not determine whether there's a growth in jobs in a particular country or not.
Let's get a view from the CCMA, because they deal with these issues.
Yeah, well, we don't believe that difficult to dismiss an employee. I mean, all what needs to happen is for an employer to follow a due process, so to speak. And that due process is very simple. There must be procedure that is followed, and there must be a reason for a person to be dismissed. So if an employer wants to come and invest in the country and decide to just dismiss people as and when they wish, I think that will create more problems than we have. The system does create a balance, because you must remember, employees in this relationship at most are the weaker party, so to speak. And also, you need to realize that the level of unionization in our labor market is not as high as it is demonstrated, so to speak. Most of people are not belonging to unions. We receive a lot of cases every day, and most people come to our processes unrepresented, so to speak.
But we must remember that the whole world of work is changing. The big corporates, big government and big unions are not the future. The future of employment lies in small business development. And so you're going to find that the informal sector has increased and small businesses have increased. And that's a very difficult arena to unionize because of the very nature of the businesses. So what we need to look at is, are our laws conducive to helping with small business development? And that's what we need to start measuring rather than the other way around.
Professor, I want to go back to the issue you raised about our strict labor laws and ask how in tune are our labor laws with what the National Development Plan is telling us to do to get things going.
Well, that is something that makes it quite difficult for academics and also big role players in the industry, because we are not all that clear how much government is really committed to the National Development Plan. I think they had a wonderful think tank where really bright minds came together setting out a wonderful plan. And I think that our labor relations regime is quite well attuned, and within that will not play a hindering role on the rolling out of the National Development Plan. And no, so I'm positive in that respect that our labor laws as it stands at the moment is not the major hurdle. To me, it is a bigger problem having a situation of protracted, violent, non-procedural strikes, for example, as compared to providing every employee a basic right before your contract is terminated to have a sound reason and to follow a fair procedure. That is basically the thing that you would do if you get home and the window is broken. You wouldn't just start there meting out discipline. You will say, what happened here, children? Maybe, well, it's the neighbor's child who break the... Find out the facts, and then only in serious instances should progressive discipline be implemented?
Yes, the question I want to go to quickly is the question of, we have seen, I want to take you to the Mineral Resources Act, where the mines have to tell the Department of Mineral Resources, we intend laying off so many workers at this time. It always, when the mines say we're laying off 6,000 workers, the politicians seem to be taken by surprise.
I think at the moment we can see with the commodity prices falling, I don't think they're being caught by surprise. I think what government are wanting is to try and find alternative solutions to retrenchment. And I do believe that we haven't been creative enough in this country to find alternative solutions. But at the same time, you cannot expect business to continue making losses when commodity prices have fallen. There has to be casualties along the way. But it's what is reasonable and what isn't reasonable. And that's why there was an important debate that government called between business, the unions, and the government on the mineral rights by the president. And that's what we need to see. And then we can find out, is it inevitable that we have to retrench, or is there something else that we can do?
And here Vic talking about the commodities, the price is falling, the commodity means the price of gold goes down, the price of oil goes down, and those are the issues that are affecting our economy. Professor.
And I think that is where we around this table are all where we have consensus. At those discussions, all of the parties from business side saying we're going to delve into reserves, we are going to see how we are going to take a haircut ourselves to see how we can save some of these jobs. From the union side to say, let us step back one bit. is it viable to request these, under the circumstances, to claim significant increase in salaries whilst China is not importing steel anymore? Those questions, and it needs much more to be a situation of, let us see how we can maintain the viability of businesses rather than it is just our interests and their interests.
But it would seem that the South African employees or the trade unions have taken on an American cliche that says what was good for business was good for America and it should be good for us. If you'd like to join us, you can still call us on 011-714-5497 or 5498 or tweet us at Recourse or email your thoughts about what issues we should be discussing on this program to rights@sabc.co.za. Stay with us.
SABC brings to you Rugby World Cup 2015.
Let's do this.
Your World makes it its business every evening to round up the leading local stories and international news to keep you informed all the time.
Make a date with Your World every evening for all the news headlines around the world to keep you abreast with knowledge.
Catch Your World for headlines across the world every Monday to Friday from 9 p.m, then Saturday and Sunday from 7 p.m.
Welcome back to Rights and Recourse to discuss labour relations in South Africa and around the world. The question I wanted to ask Bongani, they say, if you want to see whether the economy is growing or declining, you look at the numbers, the queues at the CCMA.
Well, queues at the CCMA are caused by a number of things. Maybe one needs to quickly indicate that in this year we had amendments in the Labour Relations Act, Section 198A, B and C, which specifically cover the vulnerable sector. And I don't want to go into details to that, but we'll find people who are expressing their rights by coming up and saying that in terms of the Act, what is it that's happening? That's one part. So that will inevitably raise the level of queues. But coming to the issue that you were referring to, that we have seen a lot of mines or retrenchment, so to speak. It is true that some economies are shrinking, and I don't think it has to do with the laws we have. It has to do with the global space that the business is operating. I mean, it's all over that we know what's happening with steel in China and the impact it has in our country. And the queues there are basically people asserting their rights and to say that, am I retrenched properly? And that's what CCMA seek to do. In most instances where we become aware early in terms of Section 189A, we go in and try and find alternatives. And we have made some successes in reducing the number of employees that were intended to be retrenched by coming up with alternatives. And we do that in collaboration with some of the partners like EDT, Economic Development Department, and DMR, and your productivity SA, where we help. But like Vic was saying earlier, most of these things, we only deal with them when we're in a crisis. We need to have a plan. I mean,
we have a national development plan.
No, I mean at a particular workplace or mining companies. For example, we are told that there are future forums. And if you look at the structure of the future forum, to some extent resemble what the workplace forum was saying to do. And if those future forums could be used effectively, some of these things could be identified quite early and steps taken up to make sure that the impact and extent that people are feeling out of the economic crisis we have is not in the scale it is now. But our issues are not only about retrenchment. Are a variety of issues that people are coming to raise.
Could I come in here on the economic growth side? I think we've seen the shrinking of the economy, but it's not a South African phenomenon. It's a global phenomenon. So what we've got to do now is find how we get through this difficult time and how do we prepare ourselves on the longer term. And on the short-term basis, we're going to have to come up with creative ways of putting employment on the table. We're going to have to increase our expanded public works programs. We're going to have to look at youth employment programs. That's the only way. And that means compromise to the existing deals that we've got on the table. And that's where the social pact comes in. On the longer term, we've got to change our education system so that we can become a manufacturing industry growth rather than service industry.
In other words, the education should respond to what the economy needs.
That's right. And at the moment, we're producing unemployable youth. And if we want to become a manufacturing economy, we're going to have to provide the youth that can go into the manufacturing sectors, like manufacturing of solar panels.
Professor, I don't know whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. I normally like to take a page out of the old National Party policies. When the National Parties came to power in 1948, they created these huge artisan training facilities. What happened to those artisan training facilities?
Well, we do have other pieces of legislation that deal with skills development. And I would be careful to just take leaves out of the book of the former regime, but I think that is the type of thing that one needs to do, is really to look at practical solutions. And I do want to agree with the sentiments expressed by both the other panelists here, that we should really look at some of the positive aspects. It is not just doom and gloom. It is not going to help our cause anything if we just sit back and say, well, we're in this terrible mix and there's a fix and there's absolutely nothing that we can do about it. We should look at aspects such as these public works programs. We should look at ways of better utilizing our skills development funds. We should look at good news stories such as the one by the CCMA, where they have been able, through the reference of these large-scale retrenchments, to save hundreds, if not thousands of jobs, where they assist the parties in saying, listen, let us not just look at the very first option of retrenching workers. Let us see if we can't get to some level where we can possibly save some of our jobs. And just to also take Vic's point further, in some instances we've got wonderful plans which I would, in my personal capacity, support, such as the Youth Development Program. Have we put enough money into this? Should trade unions possibly be more amenable in these circumstances to get some of our...
My problem, Professor, the Youth Development Program is a very wide term. Probably we should just hone into something and say, let us create these artisan workshops where we train people to become welders. Where we, for instance, we're building Medupi. We had to bring welders from outside South Africa. There is a great deal of industry that is in this country, that is car servicing, a simple thing, servicing a car. Teach people how to service a car so that they can start their own businesses.
We're doing that at the moment, but we don't have a critical mass. And that's what we need, to elevate those programs to a critical mass. And that's where the Transnets, the Escoms, the old parastatals used to have these huge artisan training programs which were all mothballed. And it's not, I don't think it's going to be too difficult to increase that. There are these pockets of excellence, but it's a matter of getting that critical mass that we so dearly need. And that's why we need to increase our programs of internship. And at many years we spend in NEDLAC. When I used to be on the business side, we used to sit and negotiate in NEDLAC, and it takes us 3 to 4 years to come to an agreement. We haven't got that luxury anymore to take such long times to come to an agreement. We need some urgent attention and urgent agreements.
Bongani?
Yeah, well, as my colleagues have said, we have sitters that they need to start looking future and say how are they bring about a lot of youth either from university or from schools in terms of being prepared for future jobs, not to prepare them for the jobs that are currently getting out of the labor market, so to speak.
Vic, one last word I wanted to ask you. I think I nearly forgot it. And what is the IOL advise? How does the IOL advise economies that are in recess or economies that are in a crisis?
Well, first of all, we're saying to them, don't drop your standards. You cannot use the difficult economic crisis to come about and have what we call it undecent employment, unfair labor conditions. So you need to first of all maintain standards. But at the same time, we're encouraging the governments of the world to have a look at creative programs of labor-intensive employment, of upping the skills basis, of identifying what gaps there are in the market. And what we're doing is we take the countries that have succeeded during this difficult global economic crisis and using their best practices to try and customize it in the different countries that we go to. And some are doing better than others.
Professor, we saw this huge influx of migrants into Europe. It's still happening today. We've seen pictures on television this morning. What are the rights of those people quickly?
Well, I think the whole issue of the migration problem, which is a huge catastrophe.
We are also faced with that.
Is to a large extent, the debate there is also about the human rights issue. One should never forget that the people who are crossing the Mediterranean with their small little boats are humans. And how do we treat those humans? Some countries have been prepared to accept more than their part, others to a lesser extent. But some of the labor issues that are quite prominent there is also the issue that that there's a huge brain drain from the countries
where those come from. Professor, thank you very much for your time, gentlemen. It's been a fascinating discussion. We won't cover all the aspects here that needs to be done to save or to resolve our problems in the labor sphere. This has been Rights and Recourse. This program is repeated at 10 tonight and at 5 on Monday morning. From all of us here in the studio and the rest of the team, thank you to our guests and good afternoon.